Okay, let's get into chapter 10, which is entitled The Loss of Vision. My. Chapter 10 is entitled The Loss of Vision. And immediately upon doing chapter 10, I had a footnote. And I think a lot of you know this, and I apologize for the typo, but it says uh, where the people have no vision, the people perish. And that's the end of the story. Where the people have no vision, the people perish. End of story. And you'll see as we move on into chapter 10, because history shows then that as the result of these unusual forces, in these result of these unusual forces in the education of the Negro, he easily learns to follow the line of least resistance rather than battle against odds for what real history has shown to be the right course. The Negro, he easily learns to follow the line of least resistance rather than battle against the odds for what real history has shown to be the right course. A mind that remains in the present atmosphere never undergoes sufficient development to experience what is commonly known as thinking. A mind that remains in the present atmosphere never undergoes sufficient development to experience what is commonly known as thinking. No Negro, thus submerged in the ghetto, then will have a clear conception of the present status of the race or sufficient foresight to plan for the future. And he drifts so far toward compromise that he loses moral courage. He loses moral courage. The education of the Negro then becomes a perfect device for control from without. Those who purposely promote it have every reason to rejoice. And Negroes themselves exultantly champion the cause of the oppressor. I stop right here. Let me do the note. Here I recall the brutal beating and murder of a young Black man in Memphis, Tennessee, at the hands of 4 Black police officers. What has happened to us as a people? All pleaded guilty and are awaiting minimum sentences for their actions. Mercy, Lord. I pause. A comparison of the record of the spokesman of the race today with that of those of the 18th century shows a moral surrender. During the prolonged struggle between the French and the English in America, the Negroes held a balance of power at several strategic points and used it accordingly. Today, the Negro finds himself inconsequential, inconsequential, because he can be parked on one side of the fence. The same balance of power was evident also during the American Revolution, when Negro soldiers insisted on serving side by side with others. Today, As we move on into the new Jim Crow, you go back and look at my ad for what's coming after this review. It's called the New Jim Crow by attorney Michelle Alexander, written in 2010, published in 2010. I'm bringing the concept forward just to see if the premise has been proven. So the 18th century Negro resented the 18th century Negro resented any such thing as social distinction. Today, Negroes are saying that they do not want social equality. Negroes of that epoch said with the ancient poet, I am a man and deem nothing that relates to a man a matter of indifference to me. Today, however, the average Negro says, now I am a colored man, and you white folks must settle that matter among yourselves. When again in 1816, free Negroes like Richard Allen, James Forten, Robert Purvis were referred to as a foreign element whose social status might not be secure in this country. Instead of permitting the colonizationists to shove them aside as criminals to be deported to a distant shore, they replied in no uncertain terms that this soil in America, which gave them birth, is their only true home. Here, their fathers fought, bled, and died for this country, and here they intended to stay. Today, when such things come up, you find Negroes appearing upon the scene to see how much pay they can attain to assist in the proposed undoing of the race. Today, when such things come up, you find Negroes appearing upon the scene to see how much pay they can obtain to assist in the proposed undoing of the race. Footnote. Wow. This is not the Willie Lynch theory, but an academic delivery of facts. My first book had Willie Lynch syndrome in the back of it, in the appendix. But that's what led me to Dr. Carter Woodson's book, because I know it has to be something that has happened that has caused us to fall so far. And then for us to act like we don't even see it or know it. Further emphasizing this thought of resistance a few years later, Nathan Paul, a Baptist preacher of Albany, informed the colonists that the free Negroes would not permit their traducers to formulate a program for the race. You may go ahead with your plan to deport this element in order to make slavery secure, he warned, but the free Negroes will never immigrate to Africa. We shall stay here and fight until the foul monster is crushed. Slavery must go. Those were our forefathers. The Negroes attacking Jim Crowism. That's my next book, The New Jim Crow. Almost a century ago, fearlessly questioned the constitutionality of such a provision. Speaking through Charles Lennox Raymond of that day, they said, there is a distinction between social and civil rights. We all claim the privilege of selecting our society and associations, but in civil rights, one man has not the prerogative to define rights for another. These race distinctions react in all their wickedness to say nothing of their concocted and systematized obedience and absurdity upon those who are illiberal and mean enough to practice them. Yeah. In our day, however, we find, listen to this, listen to this. This is my point. Lord have mercy. In our day, however, we find some highly educated Negroes approving such Jim Crowism. For example, not many years ago, an outstanding Baptist preacher dabbling in politics in West Virginia suggested to the whites that they enact the Jim Crow car law in their state. And we had difficulty in crushing that sentiment. Wow, that's almost like the man that advocated the removal of the laws that assisted in advancing the education of blacks, which was under affirmative action. He was a black man. I can't think of his name, but I think he was from California, and he crusaded, much like our Supreme Court justice has crusaded to take away what we gained under whatever reasoning they employ. I go back. A few years thereafter, the author heard one of our bishops say that we should have not object to such separation, for we want to be by ourselves. When this distinguished churchman died, the traduciers of the Negro lauded him to the skies, and thoughtless members of the race, thinking that he deserved it, joined in the loud acclaim, celebrating that type of mentality, the loss of vision. And you can see it. That's why we're going forward and see with our next review of the new Jim Crow and just see where we are today and how it's been played out through social engineering, creates predictive behavior. Now, numerous results from this policy may be cited. The white laboring man refuses to work with Negroes because of the false tradition that the Negro is an inferior. And at the same time, the Negro, for the same reason, becomes content with menial service and drudgery. I think some define that as black jobs recently, or Negro jobs that we talked about earlier in another chapter. The politician excludes the Negro from councils of his party and from government because he has been taught that such is necessary to maintain the supremacy of his race. The Negro, trained in the same school of thought, accepts this as final and contends for such meager consideration as the bosses may begrudgingly grant him. The mind has been overtaken because of the lack of the Holy Spirit. An irate resident in an exclusive district protests against an invasion by Negroes because he has learned that these poverty-stricken people are carriers of disease and agents of crime. The Negroes, believing that such is the truth, remain content in the ghetto. Children of Negroes are excluded from the playgrounds because of the assertion that they will contaminate those of the whites. The Negroes yielding settled down to a policy of having their children grow up in a neglected fashion in the most undesirable part of the city. Wow. Wow. Let me read that again. Children of Negroes are excluded from the playgrounds because of the assertion that they will contaminate those of the whites. The Negroes yielding. That's why I give emphasis, not so much that you cannot give up your rights and you got to know how to advance it. But when you don't see it through being engineered, then you get into this type of thinking. The children of Negroes are excluded from the playgrounds because of the assertion that they will contaminate those of the whites. The Negroes yielding settled down to a policy of having their children grow up in neglected fashion in the most undesirable part of the city. The Negro is forced to ride in a Jim Crow car to stamp upon him more easily the badge of inferiority. The educated Negro accepts it is settled and abandons the fight this social prescription. And thus goes segregation, which is the most far reaching development in the history of the Negro since enslavement of the race. In fact, it's a sequel of slavery. In fact, it's a sequel of slavery. And I add, when there's no transition program, we just release and you make it as best as you can. And then I start back to read. It has been made possible by a system of miseducating innocent people who did not know what was happening. It has been made possible by our system, social engineering, of miseducating innocent people, predictive behavior, who did not know what was happening. It is so subtle that men have participated in promoting it without knowing what they were doing. That's my reference to the 4 Black policemen beating to death the Black man, close to their same age and everything. A few who became free, re-enslaved themselves. A still larger number made no effort to become free because they did not want to disconnect themselves from their masters. And their kind still object to full freedom. And their kind still object today to being free. And that's what's leading us out front during this political season. Ever since the Civil War, when Negroes were first given the chance to participate in the management of their affairs, they have been inconsistent and compromising. Loss of vision. At one moment, Negroes fight for the principle of democracy, and at the very next moment, they barter it away for some temporary advantage. You cannot have a thing and dispose of it at the same time. For example, the Negro political leaders of the Reconstruction period clamored for suffrage and the right of holding office, serving in the militia and sitting on the jury. But few of them wanted white and colored children to attend the same school. When expressing themselves on education, most of them took the position of segregationists. And Charles Sumner, in his fight for the civil rights of the Negro, had to eliminate mixed schools from his program, not only because whites objected, because but also because the Negroes themselves did not seem to want segregation. Denied participation in the higher things of life. This is where the loss comes in. See, the label that's been given to those who are considered to be educated, but then deserts everybody else. So I read, denied participation in the higher things of life. The educated Negro himself joins too, with ill-designing persons to handicap his people. With ill joins too. The Negro himself joins too, with ill-designing persons to handicap his people by systematized exploitation. Feeling that the case of the Negro is hopeless, the educated Negro decides upon the course of personally profiting by whatever he can do in using these people as a means to an end. He grins in their faces while extracting money from them. His heart shows no fond attachment, but his heart, excuse me, shows no fond attachment to our despised cause. Such persons help the profiteer to collect from the Negroes, thus cornered a larger rental than that exacted from whites for the same property. Professional men, too, walking in their footsteps, impose also upon the poor innocent Negroes who do not know when they are being treated properly and when they are not, but high fees may be obtained from them inasmuch as they cannot always go to others for service. In the ultimate passing of the Depression, however, Negroes will not be much better off, when some of the whites now displacing them will rise to higher levels in the economic order of tomorrow. There will be little use for the factorium or scullium. Man will not need such personal attention when he can buy a machine to serve him more efficiently. Wow. We have appealed to the talented tenth for a remedy. We have appealed to the talented tenth for a remedy, but they have nothing to offer. Their minds have never functioned in this all-important sphere. The educated Negro shows no evidence of vision. He should see a new picture. If the whites are to continue for some time in doing drudgery to the exclusion of Negroes, the latter must find another way out. Nothing forces this upon one more dramatically than when he learns that white women in Montgomery, Alabama, are coming to the back door of Negro homes asking for their washing. If the whites have reached this extremity and they must be taken care of first, what be left for the Negroes? At this moment, then, the Negroes must begin to do the very things which they have been taught that they cannot do. They still have some money and they have needs to supply. They must immediately begin to pool their earnings and organize industries to participate in supplying social and economic demands. This lack of confidence is the cause of the failure of these enterprises. If the Negroes had manifested enough confidence in them and has properly supported them, then they would have been strong enough to stand the test in the crisis. Negro banks, as a rule, have failed because the people taught that their own pioneers in business cannot function in this sphere, withdrew their deposits. Wow. An individual cannot live after you extract the blood from his veins. The lack of confidence in the Negro in himself and in his possibilities is what has kept us down. If the Negro would be as fair to his own as he has been to others, this would be all that is necessary to give him a new lease on life and start the trend upward. Let me read that one more time. I'm sorry. If the Negro would be as fair to his own as he has been to others, this would be all that is necessary to give him a new lease on life and start the trend upward. Here we find that the Negro has failed to recover from this slavish habit of berating his own and worshiping others as perfect beings. No progress has been made in this respect because the more education the Negro gets, the worse off he is. The race looking to this educated class for a solution of his problems does not find any remedy, and on the contrary, sees itself further and further away from those things to which it has aspired. By forgetting the schoolroom for the time being and relying upon an awakening of the masses through adult education, we can do much to give the Negro a new point of view with respect to economic enterprise and group cooperation. The average Negro has not been sufficiently miseducated to become hopeless. As Frederick Douglass said in 1852, it is vain that we talk of being men if we do not do the work of men. We must become valuable to society in other departments of industry than those servile ones from which we are rapidly being excluded. We must show that we can do as well as they. When we can build as well as live in houses, when we can make it and when we can make as well as wear shoes, and when we can produce as well as consume wheat, corn, and rye, then we shall become valuable to society. We shall continue as we look at the new Jim Crow, but that's after we finish the review of this book. But I'm anxious to show how what Dr. Woodson observed has really multiplied to a very alarming rate.